They both talk about having to endure some form of psychological torture. He definitely has serious chemical stuff, said Kimball. Which I am sure Elon and I have inherited. It was a very emotionally challenging upbringing, but it made us who we are today. May bristled when the subject of Errol came up. Nobody gets along with him, she said. He is not nice to anyone. I don't want to tell stories because they are horrendous. You just don't talk about it. There are kids and grandkids involved. When asked to chat about Elon, Errol responded via email, Elon was a very independent and focused child at home with me. He loved computer science before anyone even knew what it was in South Africa, and his ability was widely recognized by the time he was 12 years old. Elon and his brother Kimball's activities as children and young men were so many and varied that it's difficult to name just one, as they traveled together with me extensively in Africa and the world at large, visiting all the continents regularly from the age of 6 onwards. Elon and his brother and sister were and continue to be exemplary, in every way a father could want. I'm very proud of what Elon's accomplished. Errol copied Elon on this email, and Elon warned me of corresponding with his father, insisting that his father's take on past events could not be trusted. He is an odd duck, Musk said. But when pressed for more information, Musk dodged. It would certainly be accurate to say that I did not have a good childhood, he said. It may sound good. It was not absent of good, but it was not a happy childhood. It was like misery. He's good at making life miserable, that's for sure. He can take any situation, no matter how good it is, and make it bad. He's not a happy man. I don't know. I don't know how someone becomes like he is. It would just cause too much trouble to tell you anymore. Elon and Justine have vowed that their children will not be allowed to meet Errol. When Elon was nearly 10 years old, he saw a computer for the first time at the Sandton City Mall in Johannesburg. There was an electronics store that mostly did hi-fi type stuff, but then, in one corner, they started stocking a few computers, Musk said. He felt odd right away. It was like, whoa. Holy shit, buy this machine that could be programmed to do a person's bidding. I had to have that and then hounded my father to get the computer, Musk said. Soon he owned a Commodore VIC-20, a popular home machine that went on sale in 1980. Elon's computer arrived with 5 kilobytes of memory and a workbook on the basic programming language. It was supposed to take like 6 months to get through all the lessons, Elon said. I just got super OCD on it and stayed up for 3 days with no sleep and did the entire thing. It seemed like the most super compelling thing I had ever seen. Despite being an engineer, Musk's father was something of a Luddite and dismissive of the machine. Elon recounted that he said it was just for games and that you'd never be able to do real engineering on it. I just said whatever. While bookish and into his new computer, Elon quite often led Kimball and his cousin Sky's children, Russ Linden and Peter Ribe, on adventures. They dabbled one year in selling Easter eggs door to door in the neighborhood. The eggs were not well decorated, but the boys still marked them up a few 100% for their wealthy neighbors. Elon also spearheaded their work with homemade explosives and rockets. South Africa did not have the Estes rocket kits popular among hobbyists, so Elon would create his own chemical compounds and put them inside of canisters. It is remarkable how many things you can get to explode, Elon said. Saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal are the basic ingredients for gunpowder, and then if you combine a strong acid with a strong alkaline, that will generally release a lot of energy. Granulated chlorine with brake fluid, that's quite impressive. I'm lucky I have all my fingers. When not handling explosives, the boys put on layers of clothing and goggles and shot each other with pellet guns. Elon and Kimball raced dirt bikes against each other in sandlots until Kimball flew off his bike one day and hurtled into a barbed wire fence. As the years went on, the cousins took their entrepreneurial pursuits more seriously, even attempting at one point to start a video arcade. Without any parents knowing, the boys picked out a spot for their arcade, got a lease, and started navigating the permit process for their business. Eventually, they had to get someone over 18 to sign a legal document, and neither the Rives' father nor Errol would oblige. It would take a couple of decades, but Elon and the Rives would eventually go into business together. The boys' most audacious exploits may have been their trips between Pretoria and Johannesburg. During the 1980s, South Africa could be a terribly violent place, and the 35-mile train trip linking Pretoria and Johannesburg stood out as one of the world's more dangerous rides. Kimball counted the train journeys as formative experiences for him and Elon. South Africa was not a happy-go-lucky place, and that has an impact on you. We saw some really rough stuff. It was part of an atypical upbringing, just this insane set of experiences that changes how you view risk. You don't grow up thinking getting a job is the hard part. That's not interesting enough. The boys ranged in age from about 13 to 16 and chased a mix of parties and geeky exploits in Johannesburg. During one jaunt, they went to a Dungeons and Dragons tournament. That was us being nerd master supremes, Musk said. All of the boys were into the role-playing game, which requires someone to help set the mood for a contest by imagining and then describing a scene. You have entered a room, and there is a chest in the corner. What will you do? You open the chest. You sprung a trap. Dozens of goblins are on the loose. Elon excelled at this dungeon master role and had memorized the texts detailing the powers of monsters and other characters. Under Elon's leadership, we played the role so well and won the tournament, said Peter Rive. Winning requires this incredible imagination, and Elon really set the tone for keeping people captivated and inspired. The Elon that his peers encountered at school was far less inspirational. Throughout middle and high school, Elon bounced around a couple of institutions. He spent the equivalent of 8th and 9th grades at Bryanston High School. One afternoon, Elon and Kimball were sitting at the top of a flight of concrete stairs eating when a boy decided to go after Elon. I was basically hiding from this gang that was fucking hunting me down for God knows fucking why. I think I accidentally bumped this guy at assembly that morning and he'd taken some huge offense at that. The boy crept up behind Musk, kicked him in the head, and then shoved him down the stairs. Musk tumbled down the entire flight, and a handful of boys pounced on him, some of them kicking Musk in the side and the ringleader bashing his head against the ground. They were a bunch of fucking psychos, Musk said. I blacked out. Kimball watched in horror and feared for Elon's life. He rushed down the stairs to find Elon's face bloodied and swollen. He looked like someone who had just been in the boxing ring, Kimball said. Elon then went to the hospital. It was about a week before I could get back to school, Musk said. During a news conference in 2013, Elon disclosed that he'd had a nose job to deal with the lingering effects of this beating. For 3 or 4 years, Musk endured relentless hounding at the hands of these bullies. They went so far as to beat up a boy that Musk considered his best friend until the child agreed to stop hanging out with Musk. Moreover, they got my best fucking friend, to lure me out of hiding so they could beat me up, Musk said. And that fucking hurt. While telling this part of the story, Musk's eyes welled up and his voice quivered. For some reason, they decided that I was it, and they were going to go after me non-stop. That's what made growing up difficult. For a number of years, there was no respite. You get chased around by gangs at school who tried to beat the shit out of me, and then I'd come home, and it would just be awful there as well. It was just like non-stop horrible. Musk spent the latter stages of his high school career at Pretoria Boys High School, where a growth spurt and the generally better behavior of the students made life more bearable. While a public school by definition, Pretoria Boys has functioned more like a private school for the last 100 years. It's the place you send a young man to get him ready to attend Oxford or Cambridge. The boys from Musk's class remember him as a likable, quiet, unspectacular student. There were 4 or 5 boys that were considered the very brightest, said Dion Prinsloo, who sat behind Elon in some classes. Elon was not one of them. Such comments were echoed by a half-dozen boys who also noted that Musk's lack of interest in sports left him isolated in the midst of an athletics-obsessed culture. Honestly, there were just no signs that he was going to be a billionaire, said Gideon Forey, another classmate. He was never in a leadership position at school. I was rather surprised to see what has happened to him. While Musk didn't have any close friends at school, his eccentric interests did leave an impression. One boy, Ted Wood, remembered Musk bringing model rockets to school and blasting them off during breaks. This was not the only hint of his aspirations. During a science class debate, Elon gained attention for railing against fossil fuels in favor of solar power, an almost sacrilegious stance in a country devoted to mining the Earth's natural resources. He always had firm views on things, said Wood. Terence Benny, a classmate who stayed in touch with Elon over the years, claimed that Musk had started fantasizing about colonizing other planets in high school as well. In another nod to the future, Elon and Kimball were chatting during a class break outdoors when Wood interrupted them and asked what they were going on about. They said, "We are talking about whether there is a need for branch banking in the financial industry and whether we will move to paperless banking." I remember thinking that was such an absurd comment to make. I said, "Yeah, that's great." Asterisk. While Musk might not have been among the academic elite in his class, he was among a handful of students with the grades and self-professed interest to be selected for an experimental computer program. Students were plucked out of a number of schools and brought together to learn the basic COBOL and Pascal programming languages. Musk continued to augment these technological leanings with his love of science fiction and fantasy and tried his hand at writing stories that involved dragons and supernatural beings. "I wanted to write something like Lord of the Rings," he said. May viewed these high school years through a mother's eyes and recounted plenty of tales of Musk performing spectacular academic feats. The video game he wrote, she said, impressed much older, more experienced techies. He aced math exams well beyond his years. And he had that incredible memory. The only reason he did not outrank the other boys was a lack of interest in the work prescribed by the school. As Musk saw it, "I just look at it as what grades do I need to get where I want to go. There were compulsory subjects like Afrikaans, and I just didn't see the point of learning that. It seemed ridiculous. I'd get a passing grade and that was fine. Things like physics and computers, I got the highest grade you can get in those. There needs to be a reason for a grade. I'd rather play video games, write software, and read books than try and get an A if there's no point in getting an A. I can remember failing subjects in like 4th and 5th grade. Then, my mother's boyfriend told me I'd be held back if I didn't pass. I didn't actually know you had to pass the subjects to move to the next grade. I got the best grades in class after that." At 17, Musk left South Africa for Canada. He has recounted this journey quite often in the press and typically leans on two descriptions of the motivation for his flight. The short version is that Musk wanted to get to the United States as quickly as possible and could use Canada as a pit stop via his Canadian ancestry. The second go-to story that Musk relies on has more of a social conscience. South Africa required military service at the time. Musk wanted to avoid joining the military, he has said, because it would have forced him to participate in the apartheid regime. What rarely gets mentioned is that Musk attended the University of Pretoria for 5 months before heading off on his grand adventure. He began pursuing physics and engineering but put lackluster effort into the work and soon dropped out of school. Musk characterized the time at university as just something to do while he awaited his Canadian documentation. In addition to being an inconsequential part of his life, Musk lazing through school to avoid South Africa's required military service rather undermines the tale of a brooding, adventurous youth that he likes to tell, which is likely why the stint at the University of Pretoria never seems to come up. There's no question, though, that Musk had been pining to get to the United States on a visceral level for a long time. Musk's early inclination toward computers and technology had fostered an intense interest in Silicon Valley, and his trips overseas had reinforced the idea that America was the place to get things done. South Africa, by contrast, presented far less opportunity for an entrepreneurial soul. As Kimball put it, South Africa was like a prison for someone like Elon. Musk's opportunity to flee arrived with a change in the law that allowed May to pass her Canadian citizenship to her children. Musk immediately began researching how to complete the paperwork for this process. It took about a year to receive the approvals from the Canadian government and to secure a Canadian passport. That's when Elon said, "I'm leaving for Canada," May said. In these pre-internet days, Musk had to wait 3 agonizing weeks to get a plane ticket. Once it arrived, and without flinching, he left home for good. 3. Canada. Musk's great escape to Canada was not well thought out. He knew of a great uncle in Montreal, hopped on a flight and hoped for the best. Upon landing in June 1988, Musk found a payphone and tried to use directory assistance to find his uncle. When that didn't work, he called his mother collect. She had bad news. May had sent a letter to the uncle before Musk left and received a reply while her son was in transit. The uncle had gone to Minnesota, meaning Musk had nowhere to stay. Bags in hand, Musk headed for a youth hostel. After spending a few days in Montreal exploring the city, Musk tried to come up with a long-term plan. May had family scattered all across Canada, and Musk began reaching out to them. He bought a countrywide bus ticket that let him hop on and off as he pleased for $100, and opted to head to Saskatchewan, the former home of his grandfather. After a 1,900-mile bus ride, he ended up in Swift Current, a town of 15,000 people. Musk called a second cousin out of the blue from the bus station and hitched a ride to his house. Musk spent the next year working a series of odd jobs around Canada. He tended vegetables and shoveled out grain bins at a cousin's farm located in the tiny town of Waldeck. Musk celebrated his 18th birthday there, sharing a cake with the family he'd just met and a few strangers from the neighborhood. After that, he learned to cut logs with a chainsaw in Vancouver, British Columbia. The hardest job Musk took came after a visit to the unemployment office. He inquired about the job with the best wage, which turned out to be a gig cleaning the boiler room of a lumber mill for $18 an hour. You have to put on this hazmat suit and then shimmy through this little tunnel that you can barely fit in, Musk said. Then, you have a shovel and you take the sand and goop and other residue, which is still steaming hot, and you have to shovel it through the same hole you came through. There is no escape. Someone else on the other side has to shovel it into a wheelbarrow. If you stay in there for more than 30 minutes, you get too hot and die. 30 people started out at the beginning of the week. By the third day, 5 people were left. At the end of the week, it was just Musk and 2 other men doing the work. As Musk made his way around Canada, his brother, sister, and mother were figuring out how to get there as well. When Kimball and Elon eventually reunited in Canada, their headstrong, playful natures bloomed. Elon ended up enrolling at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, in 1989. He picked Queen's over the University of Waterloo because he felt there were more good-looking women at Queen's. 2. Outside of his studies, Elon would read the newspaper alongside Kimball, and the two of them would identify interesting people they would like to meet. They then took turns cold calling these people to ask if they were available to have lunch. Among the harassed was the head of marketing for the Toronto Blue Jays baseball team, a business writer for the Globe and Mail, and a top executive at the Bank of Nova Scotia, Peter Nicholson. Nicholson remembered the boys' call well. I was not in the habit of getting out of the blue requests, he said. I was perfectly prepared to have lunch with a couple of kids that had that kind of gumption. It took 6 months to get on Nicholson's calendar, but, sure enough, the Musk brothers made a 3-hour train ride and showed up on time. Nicholson's first exposure to the Musk brothers left him with an impression many would share. Both presented themselves well and were polite. Elon, though, clearly came off as the geekier, more awkward counterpoint to the charismatic, personable Kimball. I became more impressed and fascinated as I talked to them, Nicholson said. They were so determined. Nicholson ended up offering Elon a summer internship at the bank and became his trusted advisor. Not long after their initial meeting, Elon invited Peter Nicholson's daughter Christy to his birthday party. Christy showed up at Mike's Toronto apartment with a jar of homemade lemon curd in hand and was greeted by Elon and about 15 other people. Elon had never met Christy before, but he went right up to her and led her to a couch. Then, I believe the second sentence out of his mouth was, "I think a lot about electric cars," Christy said. And then he turned to me and said, "Do you think about electric cars?" The conversation left Christy, who is now a science writer, with the distinct impression that Musk was handsome, affable, and a tremendous nerd. For whatever reason, I was so struck by that moment on the sofa, she said. You could tell that this person was very different. He captivated me in that way. With her angular features and blonde hair, Christy fit Musk's type, and the two stayed in touch during Musk's time in Canada. They never really dated, but Christy found Musk interesting enough to have lengthy conversations with him on the phone. One night he told me, if there was a way that I could not eat, so I could work more, I would not eat. I wish there was a way to get nutrients without sitting down for a meal. The enormity of his work ethic at that age and his intensity jumped out. It seemed like one of the more unusual things I had ever heard. A deeper relationship during this stint in Canada arose between Musk and Justine Wilson, a fellow student at Queen's. Leggy with long, brown hair, Wilson radiated romance and sexual energy. Justine had already fallen in love with an older man and then ditched him to go to college. Her next conquest was meant to wear a leather jacket and be a damaged James Dean sort. As fortune would have it, however, the clean-cut, posh-sounding Musk spotted Wilson on campus and went right to work trying to date her. She looked pretty great, Musk said. She was also smart and this intellectual with sort of an edge. She had a black belt in Taekwondo and was semi-bohemian and, like the hot chick on campus. He made his first move just outside of her dorm, where he pretended to have bumped into her by accident and then reminded her that they had met previously at a party. Justine, only 1 week into school, agreed to Musk's proposal of an ice cream date. When he arrived to pick up Wilson, Musk found a note on the dorm room door, notifying him that he'd been stood up. It said that she had to go study for an exam and couldn't make it and that she was sorry, Musk said. Musk then hunted down Justine's best friend and did some research, asking where Justine usually studied and what her favorite flavor of ice cream was. Later, as Justine hid in the student center studying Spanish, Musk appeared behind her with a couple of melting chocolate chip ice cream cones in hand. Wilson had dreamed of having a torrid romance with a writer. I wanted to be Sylvia and Ted, she said. What she fell for instead was a relentless, ambitious geek. The pair attended the same abnormal psychology class and compared their grades following an exam. Justine notched a 97, Musk a 98. He went back to the professor and talked his way into the 2 points he lost and got 100, Justine said. It felt like we were always competing. Musk had a romantic side as well. One time he sent Wilson a dozen roses, each with its own note, and he also gifted Wilson a copy of The Prophet filled with handwritten romantic musings. He can sweep you off your feet, Justine said. During their university years, the two youngsters were off and on, with Musk having to work hard to keep the relationship going. She was hip and dated the coolest guys and wasn't interested in Elon at all, May said. So that was hard on him. Musk pursued a couple of other girls, but kept returning to Justine. Any time she acted cool toward him, Musk responded with his usual show of force. He would call very insistently, she said. You always knew it was Elon because the phone would never stop ringing. The man does not take no for an answer. You can't blow him off. I do think of him as the Terminator. He locks his gaze onto something and says, it shall be mine. Bit by bit, he won me over. College suited Musk. He worked on being less of a know-it-all, while also finding a group of people who respected his intellectual abilities. The university students were less inclined to laugh off or deride his opinionated takes on energy, space, and whatever else was captivating him at the moment. Musk had found people who responded to his ambition rather than mocking it, and he fed on this environment. Naveed Farooq, a Canadian who grew up in Geneva, ended up in Musk's freshman year dormitory in the fall of 1990. Both men were placed in the international section where a Canadian student would get paired with a student from overseas. Musk sort of broke the system, since he technically counted as a Canadian but knew almost nothing about his surroundings. I had a roommate from Hong Kong, and he was a really nice guy, Musk said. He religiously attended every lecture, which was helpful, since I went to the least number of classes possible. For a time, Musk sold computer parts and full PCs in the dorm to make some extra cash. I could build something to suit their needs, like a tricked-out gaming machine or simple word processor that cost less than what they could get in a store, Musk said. Or if their computer didn't boot properly or had a virus, I'd fix it. I could pretty much solve any problem. Farooq and Musk bonded over their backgrounds living abroad and a shared interest in strategy board games. I don't think he makes friends easily, but he is very loyal to those he has, Farooq said. When the video game Civilization was released, the college chums spent hours building their empire, much to the dismay of Farooq's girlfriend, who was forgotten in another room. Elon could lose himself for hours on end, Farooq said. The students also relished their loner lifestyles. We are the kinds of people that can be by ourselves at a party and not feel awkward, Farooq said. We can think to ourselves and not feel socially weird about it. Musk was more ambitious in college than he'd been in high school. He studied business, competed in public speaking contests, and began to display the brand of intensity and competitiveness that marks his behavior today. After one economics exam, Musk, Farooq, and some other students in class came back to the dorms and began comparing notes to try to ascertain how well they did on the test. It soon became clear that Musk had a firmer grasp on the material than anyone else. This was a group of fairly high achievers, and Elon stood way outside of the bell curve, Farouk said. Musk's intensity has continued to be a constant in their long relationship. When Elon gets into something, he develops just this different level of interest in it than other people. That is what differentiates Elon from the rest of humanity. In 1992, having spent 2 years at Queen's, Musk transferred to the University of Pennsylvania on a scholarship. Musk saw the Ivy League school as possibly opening some additional doors and went off in pursuit of dual degrees, first an economics degree from the Wharton School and then a bachelor's degree in physics. Justine stayed at Queen's, pursuing her dream of becoming a writer, and maintained a long-distance relationship with Musk. Now and again, she would visit him, and the two would sometimes head off to New York for a romantic weekend. Musk blossomed even more at Penn, and really started to feel comfortable while hanging out with his fellow physics students. At Penn, he met people that thought like him, May said. There were some nerds there. He so enjoyed them. I remember going for lunch with them, and they were talking physics things. They were saying A plus B equals pi squared, or whatever. They would laugh out loud. It was cool to see him so happy. Once again, however, Musk did not make many friends among the broader school body. It's difficult to find former students who remember him being there at all. But he did make one very close friend named Adeo Resi, who would go on to be a Silicon Valley entrepreneur in his own right and is to this day as tight with Elon as anyone. Resi is a lanky guy well over 6 feet tall and possesses an eccentric air. He was the artistic, colorful foil to the studious, more buttoned-up Musk. Both of the young men were transfer students and ended up being placed in the funky freshman dorm. The lackluster social scene did not live up to Resi's expectations, and he talked Musk into renting a large house off campus. They got the 10-bedroom home relatively cheap, since it was a frat house that had gone unrented. During the week, Musk and Resi would study, but as the weekend approached, Resi, in particular, would transform the house into a nightclub. He covered the windows with trash bags to make it pitch black inside and decorated the walls with bright paints and whatever objects he could find. It was a full-out, unlicensed speakeasy, Resi said. We would have as many as 500 people. We would charge $5, and it would be pretty much all you could drink, beer and jello shots and other things. Come Friday night, the ground around the house would shake from the intensity of the bass being pumped out by Resi's speakers. May visited one of the parties and discovered that Resi had hammered objects into the walls and lacquered them with glow-in-the-dark paint. She ended up working the door as the coat checked money taker and grabbed a pair of scissors for protection as the cash piled up in a shoebox. A second house had 14 rooms. Musk, Resi, and one other person lived there. They fashioned tables by laying plywood on top of used kegs and came up with other makeshift furniture ideas. Musk returned home one day to find that Resi had nailed his desk to the wall and then painted it in day-glow colors. Musk retaliated by pulling his desk down, painting it black, and studying. I'm like, dude, that's installation art in our party house, said Resi. Remind Musk of this incident and he'll respond matter-of-factly, it was a desk. Musk will have the occasional vodka and Diet Coke, but he's not a big drinker and does not really care for the taste of alcohol. Somebody had to stay sober during these parties, Musk said. I was paying my own way through college and could make an entire month's rent in one night. Adeo was in charge of doing cool shit around the house, and I would run the party. As Resi put it, Elon was the most straight-laced dude you have ever met. He never drank. He never did anything. Zero. Literally nothing. The only time Resi had to step in and moderate Musk's behavior came during video game binges that could go on for days. Musk's longtime interest in solar power and in finding other new ways to harness energy expanded at Penn. In December 1994, he had to come up with a business plan for one of his classes and ended up writing a paper titled The Importance of Being Solar. The document started with a bit of Musk's wry sense of humor. At the top of the page, he wrote, "The sun will come out tomorrow." Little often Annie on the subject of renewable energy. The paper went on to predict a rise in solar power technology based on materials improvements and the construction of large-scale solar plants. Musk delved deeply into how solar cells work and the various compounds that can make them more efficient. He concluded the paper with a drawing of the power station of the future. It depicted a pair of giant solar arrays in space, each 4 kilometers in width, sending their juice down to Earth via microwave beams to a receiving antenna with a 7-kilometer diameter. Musk received a 98 on what his professor deemed a very interesting and well-written paper. A second paper talked about taking research documents and books and electronically scanning them, performing optical character recognition, and putting all of the information in a single database, much like a mix between today's Google Books and Google Scholar. And a third paper dwelled on another of Musk's favorite topics, ultracapacitors. In the 44-page document, Musk is plainly jubilant over the idea of a new form of energy storage that would suit his future pursuits with cars, planes, and rockets. Pointing to the latest research coming out of a lab in Silicon Valley, he wrote, "The end result represents the first new means of storing significant amounts of electrical energy since the development of the battery and fuel cell." Furthermore, because the ultracapacitor retains the basic properties of a capacitor, it can deliver its energy over 100 times faster than a battery of equivalent weight, and be recharged just as quickly. Musk received a 97 for this effort and praise for a very thorough analysis with excellent financials. The remarks from the professor were spot on. Musk's clear, concise writing is the work of a logician, moving from one point to the next with precision. What truly stood out, though, was Musk's ability to master difficult physics concepts in the midst of actual business plans. Even then, he showed an unusual knack for being able to perceive a path from a scientific advance to a for-profit enterprise. As Musk began to think more seriously about what he would do after college, he briefly considered getting into the video game business. He'd been obsessed with video games since his childhood and had held a gaming internship. But he came to see them as not quite grand enough a pursuit. "I really like computer games, but then if I made really great computer games, how much effect would that have on the world?" he said. "It wouldn't have a big effect. Even though I have an intrinsic love of video games, I couldn't bring myself to do that as a career." In interviews, Musk often makes sure that people know he had some truly big ideas on his mind during this period of his life. As he tells it, he would daydream at Queen's and Penn and usually end up with the same conclusion. He viewed the internet, renewable energy, and space as the three areas that would undergo significant change in the years to come and as the markets where he could make a big impact. He vowed to pursue projects in all three. "I told all my ex-girlfriends and my ex-wife about these ideas," he said. It probably sounded like super crazy talk. Musk's insistence on explaining the early origins of his passion for electric cars, solar energy, and rockets can come off as insecure. It feels as if Musk is trying to shape his life story in a forced way. But for Musk, the distinction between stumbling into something and having intent is important. Musk has long wanted the world to know that he's different from the run-of-the-mill entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. He wasn't just sniffing out trends, and he wasn't consumed by the idea of getting rich. He's been in pursuit of a master plan all along. "I really was thinking about this stuff in college," he said. "It is not some invented story after the fact. I don't want to seem like a Johnny-come-lately or that I'm chasing a fad or just being opportunistic. I'm not an investor. I like to make technologies real that I think are important for the future and useful in some sort of way." 4. Elon's first startup. In the summer of 1994, Musk and his brother Kimball took their first steps toward becoming honest-to-God Americans. They set off on a road trip across the country. Kimball had been working as a franchisee for college pro painters and done well for himself, running what amounted to a small business. He sold off his part of the franchise and pooled the money with what Musk had on hand to buy a beat-up 1970s BMW 320i. The brothers began their trip near San Francisco in August, as temperatures in California soared. The first part of the drive took them down to Needles, a city in the Mojave Desert. There they experienced the sweaty thrill of 120-degree weather in a car with no air conditioning and learned to love pit stops at Carl's Jr. burger joints, where they spent hours recuperating in the cold. The trip provided plenty of time for your typical 20-something hijinks and raging capitalist daydreaming. The web had just started to become accessible to the public thanks to the rise of directory sites like Yahoo! And tools like Netscape's browser. The brothers were tuned into the internet and thought they might like to start a company together doing something on the web. From California to Colorado, Wyoming, South Dakota, and Illinois, they took turns driving, brainstorming, and talking shit before heading back east to get Musk to school that fall. The best idea to arise from the journey was an online network for doctors. This wasn't meant to be something as ambitious as electronic health records, but more of a system for physicians to exchange information and collaborate. It seemed like the medical industry was one that could be disrupted, Kimball said. I went to work on a business plan and the sales and marketing side of it later, but it didn't fly. We didn't love it. Musk had spent the earlier part of that summer in Silicon Valley, holding down a pair of internships. By day, he worked at Pinnacle Research Institute. Based in Los Gatos, Pinnacle was a much Bollywood startup with a team of scientists exploring ways in which ultracapacitors could be used as a revolutionary fuel source in electric and hybrid vehicles. The work also veered, at least conceptually, into more bizarre territory. Musk could talk at length about how ultracapacitors might be used to build laser-based sidearms in the tradition of Star Wars and just about any other futuristic film. The laser guns would release rounds of enormous energy, and then the shooter would replace an ultracapacitor at the base of the gun, much like swapping out a clip of bullets, and start blasting away again. Ultracapacitors also looked promising as the power supplies for missiles. They were more resilient than batteries under the mechanical stresses of a launch and would hold a more consistent charge over long periods of time. Musk fell in love with the work at Pinnacle and began using it as the basis for some of his business plan experiments at Penn and for his industrialist fantasies. In the evenings, Musk headed to Rocket Science Games, a startup based in Palo Alto that wanted to create the most advanced video games ever made by moving them off cartridges and onto CDs that could hold more information. The CDs would in theory allow them to bring Hollywood-style storytelling and production quality to the games. A team of budding all-stars who were a mix of engineers and film people was assembled to pull off the work. Tony Fadell, who would later drive much of the development of both the iPod and iPhone at Apple, worked at Rocket Science, as did the guys who developed the QuickTime multimedia software for Apple. They also had people who worked on the original Star Wars effects at Industrial Light and Magic and some who did games at LucasArts Entertainment. Rocket Science gave Musk a flavor for what Silicon Valley had to offer both from a talent and culture perspective. There were people working at the office 24 hours a day, and they didn't think it at all odd that Musk would turn up around 5 p.m. every evening to start his second job. We brought him in to write some very menial low-level code, said Peter Barrett, an Australian engineer who helped start the company. He was completely unflappable. After a short while, I don't think anyone was giving him any direction, and he ended up making what he wanted to make. Specifically, Musk had been asked to write the drivers that would let joysticks and mice communicate with various computers and games. Drivers are the same types of annoying files that you have to install to get a printer or camera working with a home computer, true grunt work. A self-taught programmer, Musk fancied himself quite good at coding and assigned himself to more ambitious jobs. I was basically trying to figure out how you could multitask stuff, so you could read video from a CD, while running a game at the same time, Musk said. At the time, you could do one or the other. It was this complicated bit of assembly programming. Complicated indeed. Musk had to issue commands that spoke directly to a computer's main microprocessor and fiddled with the most basic functions that made the machine work. Bruce Lee, the former lead engineer behind Apple's QuickTime, had overseen the hiring of Musk and marveled at his ability to pull all-nighters. He had boundless energy, Lee said. Kids these days have no idea about hardware or how stuff works, but he had a PC hacker background and was not afraid to just go figure things out. Musk found in Silicon Valley a wealth of the opportunity he'd been seeking and a place equal to his ambitions. He would return 2 summers in a row and then bolt west permanently after graduating with dual degrees from Penn. He initially intended to pursue a doctorate in materials science and physics at Stanford and to advance the work he'd done at Pinnacle on ultracapacitors. As the story goes, Musk dropped out of Stanford after 2 days, finding the internet's call irresistible. He talked Kimball into moving to Silicon Valley as well, so they could conquer the web together. The first inklings of a viable internet business had come to Musk during his internships. A salesperson from the Yellow Pages had come into one of the startup offices. He tried to sell the idea of an online listing to complement the regular listing a company would have in the big fat yellow pages book. The salesman struggled with his pitch and clearly had little grasp of what the internet actually was or how someone would find a business on it. The flimsy pitch got Musk thinking, and he reached out to Kimball, talking up the idea of helping businesses get online for the first time. Elon said, "These guys don't know what they are talking about. Maybe this is something we can do," Kimball said. This was 1995, and the brothers were about to form Global Link Information Network, a startup that would eventually be renamed Zip2. For details on the controversy surrounding Zip2's founding and Musk's academic record, see Appendix 1. The Zip2 idea was ingenious. Few small businesses in 1995 understood the ramifications of the internet. They had little idea how to get on it and didn't really see the value in creating a website for their business or even in having a yellow pages-like listing online. Musk and his brother hoped to convince restaurants, clothing shops, hairdressers, and the like that the time had come for them to make their presence known to the web surfing public. Zip2 would create a searchable directory of businesses and tie this into maps. Musk often explained the concept through pizza, saying that everyone deserved the right to know the location of their closest pizza parlor and the turn-by-turn directions to get there. This may seem obvious today, think Yelp meets Google Maps, but back then, not even stoners had dreamed up such a service. The Musk brothers brought Zip2 to life at 430 Sherman Avenue in Palo Alto. They rented a studio apartment-sized office, 20 feet by 30 feet, and acquired some basic furniture. The three-story building had its quirks. There were no elevators, and the toilets often backed up. It was literally a shitty place to work, said an early employee. To get a fast internet connection, Musk struck a deal with Ray Girouard, an entrepreneur who ran an internet service provider operation from the floor below the Zip2 offices. According to Girouard, Musk drilled a hole in the drywall near the Zip2 door and then strung an Ethernet cable down the stairwell to the ISP. They were slow to pay a couple of times but never stiffed me on the bill, Girouard said. Musk did all of the original coding behind the service himself, while the more amiable Kimball looked to ramp up the door-to-door sales operation. Musk had acquired a cheap license to a database of business listings in the Bay Area that would give a business's name and its address. He then contacted Navtech, a company that had spent hundreds of millions of dollars to create digital maps and directions that could be used in early GPS navigation-style devices, and struck a masterful bargain. "We called them up, and they gave us the technology for free," said Kimball. Musk merged the two databases together to get a rudimentary system up and running. Over time, Zip2's engineers had to augment this initial data haul with more maps to cover areas outside of major metropolitan areas and to build custom turn-by-turn directions that would look good and work well on a home computer. Elon Musk gave his sons $28,000 to help them through this period, but they were more or less broke after getting the office space, licensing software, and buying some equipment. For the first 3 months of Zip2's life, Musk and his brother lived at the office. They had a small closet where they kept their clothes and would shower at the YMCA. "Sometimes we ate 4 meals a day at Jack in the Box," Kimball said. "It was open 24 hours, which suited our work schedule. I got a smoothie one time, and there was something in it. I just pulled it out and kept drinking. I haven't been able to eat there since, but I can still recite their menu." Next, the brothers rented a 2-bedroom apartment. They didn't have the money or the inclination to get furniture. So there were just a couple of mattresses on the floor. Musk somehow managed to convince a young South Korean engineer to come work at Zip2 as an intern in exchange for room and board. "This poor kid thought he was coming over for a job at a big company," Kimball said. "He ended up living with us and had no idea what he was getting into." One day, the intern drove the Musk's battered BMW 320i to work, and a wheel came off en route. The axle dug into the street at the intersection of Page Mill Road and El Camino Real, and the groove it carved out remained visible for years. Zip the 2nd of May have been a go-go internet enterprise aimed at the information age, but getting it off the ground required old-fashioned door-to-door salesmanship. Businesses needed to be persuaded of the web's benefits and charmed into paying for the unknown. In late 1995, the Musk brothers began making their first hires and assembling a motley sales team. Jeff Hillman, a free-spirited 20-year-old trying to figure out what to do with his life, arrived as one of Zip2's first recruits. He'd been watching TV late one night with his dad and seen a web address printed at the bottom of the screen during a commercial. It was for something.com, Hillman said. I remember sitting there and asking my dad what we were looking at. He said he didn't know either. That's when I realized I had to go find me some internet. Hillman spent a couple of weeks trying to chat up people who could explain the internet to him and then stumbled on a 2x2-inch Zip2 job listing in the San Jose Mercury News. Internet sales apply here, it read, and Hillman got the gig. A handful of other salespeople joined him and worked for commissions. Musk never seemed to leave the office. He slept, not unlike a dog, on a beanbag next to his desk. Almost every day, I'd come in at 7:30 or 8 a.m., and he'd be asleep right there on that bag, Hillman said. Maybe he showered on the weekends. I don't know. Musk asked those first employees of Zip2 to give him a kick when they arrived, and he'd wake up and get back to work. While Musk did his possessed coder thing, Kimball became the rah-rah sales leader. Kimball was the eternal optimist, and he was very, very uplifting, Hillman said. I had never met anyone quite like him. Kimball sent Hillman to the high-end Stanford shopping mall and to University Avenue, the main drag in Palo Alto, to coax retailers into signing up with Zip2, explaining that a sponsored listing would send a company to the top of search results. The big problem, of course, was that no one was buying. Week after week, Hillman knocked on doors and returned to the office with very little to report in the way of good news. The nicest responses came from the people who told Hillman that advertising on the internet sounded like the dumbest thing they had ever heard of. Most often, the shop owners just told Hillman to leave and stop bothering them. When lunchtime came around, the Musks would reach into a cigar box where they kept some cash, take Hillman out, and get the depressing status reports on the sales. Craig Moore, another early employee, gave up his job selling real estate to hawk Zip2's service. He decided to court auto dealerships because they usually spent lots of money on advertising. He told them about Zip2's main website, tried to convince them that demand was high to get a listing like. The service did not always work when Moore demonstrated it, or it would load very slowly, as was common back then. This forced him to talk the customers into imagining Zip2's potential. One day I came back with about $900 in checks, Moore said. I walked into the office and asked the guys what they wanted me to do with the money. Elon stopped pounding his keyboard, leaned out from behind his monitor, and said, "No way, you got money." What kept the employee spirits up were the continuous improvements Musk made with the Zip2 software. The service had morphed from a proof of concept to an actual product that could be used and demoed. Ever marketing savvy, the Musk brothers tried to make their web service seem more important by giving it an imposing physical body. Musk built a huge case around a standard PC and lugged the unit onto a base with wheels. When prospective investors would come by, Musk would put on a show and roll this massive machine out so that it appeared like Zip2 ran inside of a mini supercomputer. The investors thought that was impressive, Kimball said. Hillman also noticed that the investors bought into Musk's slavish devotion to the company. Even then, as essentially a college kid with zits, Elon had this drive that this thing, whatever it was, had to get done, and that if he didn't do it, he'd miss his shot, Hillman said. I think that's what the VC saw, that he was willing to stake his existence on building out this platform. Musk actually said as much to one venture capitalist, informing him, "My mentality is that of a samurai. I would rather commit seppuku than fail." Early on in the Zip2 venture, Musk acquired an important confidant, who tempered some of these more dramatic impulses. Greg Corey, a Canadian businessman in his mid-30s, had met the Musks in Toronto and bought into the early Zip2 brainstorming. The boys had showed up at his door one morning to inform Corey that they intended to head to California to give the business a shot. Still in his red bathrobe, Corey went back into the house, dug around for a couple of minutes, and came back with a wad of $6,000. In early 1996, he moved to California and joined Zip2 as a co-founder. Corey, who had done a number of real estate deals in the past and had actual business experience and skills at reading people, served as the adult supervision at Zip2. The Canadian had a knack for calming Musk and ended up becoming something of a mentor. Really smart people sometimes don't understand that not everyone can keep up with them or go as fast, said Derek Prodian, a venture capitalist who would become Zip2's chief executive officer. Greg is one of the few people that Elon would listen to and had a way of putting things in context for him. Corey also used to referee fistfights between Elon and Kimball in the middle of the office. I don't get in fights with anyone else, but Elon and I don't have the ability to reconcile a vision other than our own, Kimball said. During a particularly nasty scrap over a business decision, Elon ripped some skin off his fist and had to go get a tetanus shot. Corey put an end to the fights after that. Corey died of a heart attack in 2012 at the age of 51, having made a fortune investing in Musk's companies. Musk attended his funeral. We owe him a lot, said Kimball. In early 1996, Zip2 underwent a massive change. The venture capital firm More Davido Ventures had caught wind of a couple of South African boys trying to make a yellow pages for the internet and met with the brothers. Musk, while raw in his presentation skills, pitched the company well enough, and the investors came away impressed with his energy. More Davido invested $3 million into the company. With these funds in hand, the company officially changed its name from Global Link to Zip2, the idea being Zip2 here, Zip2 there, moved to a larger office at 390 Cambridge Avenue in Palo Alto, and began hiring talented engineers. Zip2 also shifted its business strategy. At the time, the company had built one of the best direction systems on the web. Zip2 would advance this technology and take it from focusing just on the Bay Area to having a national scope. The company's main focus, however, would be an altogether new play. Instead of selling its service door-to-door, Zip2 would create a software package that could be sold to newspapers, which would in turn build their own directories for real estate, auto dealers, and classifieds. The newspapers were late understanding how the internet would impact their businesses, and Zip2 software would give them a quick way of getting online without needing to develop all their own technology from scratch. For its part, Zip2 could chase bigger prey and get a cut of a nationwide network of listings. This transition of the business model and the company's makeup would be a seminal moment in Musk's life. The venture capitalists pushed Musk into the role of chief technology officer and hired Rich Saucon as the company's CEO. Saucon had worked at Creative Labs, a maker of audio equipment, and run the business development group at the company, where he steered a number of investments in internet startups. Zip2's investors saw him as experienced and clued into the web. While Musk agreed to the arrangement, he came to resent giving up control of Zip2. Probably the biggest regret the whole time I worked with him was that he had made a deal with the devil with More Davido, said Jim Ambrose, the vice president of engineering at Zip2. Elon didn't have any operational responsibilities, and he wanted to be CEO. Ambrose had worked at Hewlett-Packard Labs and Silicon Graphics Inc. and exemplified the high-caliber talent Zip2 brought on after the first wave of money arrived. Silicon Graphics, a maker of high-end computers beloved by Hollywood, was the flashiest company of its day and had hoarded the elite geeks of Silicon Valley. And yet Ambrose used the promise of internet riches to poach a team of SGI's smartest engineers over to Zip2. Our attorneys got a letter from SGI saying that we were cherry-picking the very best guys, Ambrose said. Elon thought that was fantastic. While Musk had excelled as a self-taught coder, his skills weren't nearly as polished as those of the new hires. They took one look at Zip2's code and began rewriting the vast majority of the software. Musk bristled at some of their changes, but the computer scientists needed just a fraction of the lines of code that Musk used to get their jobs done. They had a knack for dividing software projects into chunks that could be altered and refined, whereas Musk fell into the classic self-taught coder trap of writing what developers call hairballs, big, monolithic hunks of code that could go berserk for mysterious reasons. The engineers also brought a more refined working structure and realistic deadlines to the engineering group. This was a welcome change from Musk's approach, which had been to set overly optimistic deadlines and then try to get engineers to work non-stop for days on end to meet the goals. If you asked Elon how long it would take to do something, there was never anything in his mind that would take more than an hour, Ambrose said. We came to interpret an hour as really taking a day or two, and if Elon ever did say something would take a day, we allowed for a week or 2 weeks. Starting Zip2 and watching it grow imbued Musk with self-confidence. Terence Benny, one of Musk's high school friends, came to California for a visit and noticed the change in Musk's character right away. He watched Musk confront a nasty landlord who had been giving his mother, who was renting an apartment in town, a hard time. He said, "If you're going to bully someone, bully me." It was startling to see him take over the situation. The last time I had seen him, he was this geeky, awkward kid who would sometimes lose his temper. He was the kid you would pick on to get a response. Now he was confident and in control. Musk also began consciously trying to manage his criticism of others. Elon is not someone who would say, "I feel you. I see your point of view," said Justine. Because he doesn't have that "I feel you" dimension, there were things that seemed obvious to other people that weren't that obvious to him. He had to learn that a 20-something-year-old shouldn't really shoot down the plans of older, senior people and point out everything wrong with them. He learned to modify his behavior in certain ways. I just think he comes at the world through strategy and intellect. The personality tweaks worked with varying degrees of success. Musk still tended to drive the young engineers mad with his work demands and blunt criticism. "I remember being in a meeting once brainstorming about a new product, a new car site," said Doris Downs, the creative director at Zip2. "Someone complained about a technical change that we wanted being impossible. Elon turned and said, 'I don't really give a damn what you think,' and walked out of the meeting." For Elon, the word no does not exist, and he expects that attitude from everyone around him. Periodically, Musk let loose on the more senior executives as well. You would see people come out of the meetings with this disgusted look on their face. "More," the salesman said. "You don't get to where Elon is now by always being a nice guy," and he was just so driven and sure of himself. As Musk tried to come to terms with the changes the investors had inflicted on Zip2, he did enjoy some of the perks of having big money backing. The financiers helped the Musk brothers with their visas. They also gave them $30,000 each to buy cars. Musk and Kimball had traded in their dilapidated BMW for a dilapidated sedan that they spray painted with polka dots. Kimball upgraded from that to a BMW 3 Series, and Musk bought a Jaguar A-Type. It kept breaking down, and would arrive at the office on a flatbed, Kimball said. But Elon always thought big. Asterisk. As a bonding exercise one weekend, Musk, Ambrose, a few other employees and friends took off for a bike ride through the Saratoga Gap Trail in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Most of the riders had been training and were accustomed to strenuous sessions in the summer's heat. They set up the mountains at a furious pace. After an hour, Russ Wright, Musk's cousin, reached the top and proceeded to vomit. Right behind him were the rest of the cyclists. Then, 15 minutes later, Musk became visible to the group. His face had turned purple, and sweat poured out of him, and he made it to the top. "I always think back to that ride. He wasn't close to being in the condition needed for it," Ambrose said. "Anyone else would have quit or walked up their bike. As I watched him climb that final 100 feet with suffering all over his face, I thought, that's Elon. Do or die, but don't give up." Musk continued to be a ball of energy around the office as well. Ahead of visits by venture capitalists and other investors, Musk would rally the troops and instruct them all to get on the phone to create a buzzy atmosphere. He also formed a video game team to participate in competitions around Quake, a first-person shooter game. "We competed in one of the first nationwide tournaments," Musk said. "We came in second, and we would have come in first, but one of our top players' machine crashed because he had pushed his graphics card too hard. We won a few $1,000s. Zip2 had remarkable success courting newspapers. The New York Times, Knight Ridder, Hearst Corporation, and other media properties signed up to its service. Some of these companies contributed $50 million in additional funding for Zip2. Services like Craigslist with its free online classifieds had just started to appear, and the newspapers needed some course of action. The newspapers knew they were in trouble with the internet, and the idea was to sign up as many of them as possible, Ambrose said. They wanted classifieds and listings for real estate, automotive, and entertainment, and could use us as a platform for all these online services. Zip2 acquired a trademark for its "We Power the Press" slogan, and the influx of cash kept Zip2 growing fast. Company headquarters were soon so crowded that one desk ended up directly in front of the women's bathroom. In 1997, Zip2 moved into flashier, more spacious digs at 444 Castro Street in Mountain View. It irritated Musk that Zip2 had become a behind-the-scenes player to the newspapers. He believed the company could offer interesting services directly to consumers and encouraged the purchase of the domain name city.com with the hopes of turning it into a consumer destination. But the lure of the media company's money kept Saucon and the board on a conservative path, and they decided to worry about a consumer push down the road. In April 1998, Zip2 announced a blockbuster move to double down on its strategy. It would merge with its main competitor CitySearch in a deal valued at around $300 million. The new company would retain the CitySearch name, while Saucon would head up the venture. On paper, the union looked very much like a merger of equals. CitySearch had built up an extensive set of directories for cities around the country. It also appeared to have strong sales and marketing teams that would complement the talented engineers at Zip2. The merger had been announced in the press and seemed inevitable. The opinions on what happened next vary greatly. The logistics of the situation required the two companies to go over each other's books and to figure out which employees would be fired to avoid a duplication of roles. This process raised some questions about how frank CitySearch had been with its financials and rankled some executives at Zip2 who could see their positions being diminished or erased altogether at the new company. One faction inside Zip2 argued that the deal should be abandoned, while Saucon demanded that it go through. Musk, who had been an early advocate of the deal, turned against it. In May 1998, the two companies cancelled the merger, and the press pounced, making a big deal of the chaotic bust-up. Musk urged Zip2's board to oust Saucon and reinstate him as CEO of Zip2. The board declined. Instead, Musk lost his chairman title, and Saucon was replaced by Derek Prodian, a venture capitalist with more Davido. Saucon considered Musk's behavior through the whole affair atrocious and later pointed to the board's reaction and Musk's demotion as evidence that they felt the same way. There was a lot of backlash and finger-pointing, Prodian said. Elon wanted to be CEO, but I said, this is your first company. Let's find an acquirer and make some money, so you can do your second, third, and fourth company. With the deal busted, Zip2 found itself in a predicament. It was losing money. Musk still wanted to go the consumer route, but Prodian feared that would take too much capital. Microsoft had mounted a charge into the same market, and startups with mapping, real estate, and automotive ideas multiplied. The Zip2 engineers were deflated and worried that they might not be able to outrun the competition. Then, in February 1999, the PC maker Compaq Computer suddenly offered to pay $307 million in cash for Zip2. It was like pennies from heaven, said Ed Ho, a former Zip2 executive. Zip2's board accepted the offer, and the company rented out a restaurant in Palo Alto and threw a huge party. More Davido had made back 20 times its original investment, and Musk and Kimball had come away with $22 million and $15 million, respectively. Musk never entertained the idea of sticking around at Compaq. As soon as it was clear the company would be sold, Elon was on to his next project, Prodian said. From that point on, Musk would fight to maintain control of his companies and stay CEO. We were overwhelmed and just thought these guys must know what they're doing, Kimball said. But they didn't. There was no vision once they took over. They were investors, and we got on well with them, but the vision had just disappeared from the company. Years later, after he had time to reflect on the Zip2 situation, Musk realized that he could have handled some of the situations with employees better. I had never really run a team of any sort before, Musk said. I'd never been a sports captain or captain of anything or managed a single person. I had to think, okay, what are the things that affect how a team functions? The first obvious assumption would be that other people will behave like you. But that's not true. Even if they would like to behave like you, they don't necessarily have all the assumptions or information that you have in your mind. So, if I know a certain set of things, and I talk to a replica of myself but only communicate half the information, you can't expect that the replica would come to the same conclusion. You have to put yourself in a position where you say, well, how would this sound to them, knowing what they know?